Hi, my name is Nicolina. I'm 31 years old, and frankly, I'm still reeling from the event that made me question everything I knew about my family, its warmth, its strength, and the love I'd believed in since childhood. Let me start from the beginning, because without it, the story will lose its meaning, and I'm too tired to keep it all to myself. I work as a mid-level manager in a retail company, not my dream career, but it's stable, honest, and, most importantly, it allows me to justify my endless spending. For 8 long years, I lived, saving every penny, literally cutting out everything unnecessary from my budget: movies, trips, even good perfume, all for one thing: my own little corner. My dream was ridiculously simple, almost childish. To have my own kitchen, where everything is in its place, where it smells of morning coffee and bread, and where the walls would hold only my sounds, my thoughts, my breath. But fate loves to tease those who are patient. I was still renting a tiny apartment, habitually counting my savings, when I got a call that evening from Paulina, my friend, a woman with an infectious laugh and the eternal confidence that she can find a solution to any problem. She's been a realtor for 10 years, and her voice always sounds slightly triumphant on the phone when she feels she's stumbled upon something special. "Nicolina, I have something for you. You have to hear it," she said with that intonation that instantly makes your heart beat faster. She told me about the apartment. The owners, she said, were desperate to sell. They had to move to Texas next month, and the price, mind you, was half the market price. What's the catch? I asked, because, as we know, there are catches hidden behind any promise of happiness. Paulina laughed. Well, this needs work, a lot, a lot. I'm not one to shy away from dirty work. When I was a child, my father taught me how to hold a hammer and not be afraid of tools, taught me to fix, paint, and sand. There was always something soothing about it, like you were returning the world to its proper shape. So when I asked how much work they were talking about, I was prepared for anything. Paulina listed it all. The kitchen was old, the bathroom needed a complete overhaul. The walls were peeling, the floors creaked and begged for a new lease of life. But, she said, the bones of the apartment were sound, really good. A minute later, photos arrived on my phone, and the price, damn it, I blurted out loud. It was all true, half the price of similar apartments in the area. Yes, the look was well, time-worn, but through the peeling paint and old furniture, I saw not devastation, but opportunity. The space, the light, the well-designed layout, all of it screamed of a house hiding beneath a layer of dust, just waiting for someone to breathe life into it. I want to see it, I said. We met at the house the next day. My first impression was strong. The air inside smelled musty, the walls were peeling, and the kitchen had clearly remained unchanged since the days when rooster wallpaper was still in vogue. But there was something elusively alive in these empty rooms, as if the spirits of those who had once laughed, argued, and loved here still lingered. So, what do you think? Paulina asked, crossing her arms. I silently walked from room to room, wondering where the sofa would go, where I'd hang the shelves, how I'd repaint the windows. Everything in me resisted. My mind told me this was madness, that I was getting into an adventure, but my heart already knew. I wanted this place. The purchase turned out to be its own challenge: paperwork, signatures, endless phone calls to the bank. It all seemed like an endless obstacle course, but when I finally received the keys, I could barely sleep for joy. I held them in my palm like a relic, and spent the entire weekend sitting on the floor of my new apartment, surrounded by the echoing empty rooms, imagining how I would repaint the walls, what curtains I would choose, where I would place the coffee machine. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my sister, not even at work. I wanted it to be a surprise. Sandra, my older sister, has always been the golden child, the perfect daughter, the perfect wife. She's 34, her husband, Leonardo, had a lavish wedding, almost entirely paid for by our parents, and now they live in their own house, visiting mom and dad every Sunday, playing the role of the perfect couple. Of course, I try to come when I can, but work doesn't always let me. My parents, Tom and Linda, are kind people, but their love for Sandra was always special, tinged with admiration. They helped her with the wedding, the house, everything else. I'd gotten used to it. I lived on my own, without anyone else's safety net, and now, finally, I have my own place, my own home, my own little world. The day I closed the deal, I was so happy inside. I decided, next week, Saturday, when Sandra and Leonardo went to dinner with my parents again, I would go there and tell everyone at once. I couldn't think of a better time. Saturday arrived, and, unable to sit still, almost bouncing with anticipation, I drove to my parents' house, gripping the steering wheel tightly and mentally rehearsing exactly how I would tell them this news, which I'd kept secret for so long. I had photos on my phone, I'd thought through every detail, I knew where I'd start, how I'd show them, where I'd mention the price, so they'd understand how great I was, how I'd managed it all on my own. Without anyone's help, I thought they'd be proud. That Mom would shed a tear, and Dad would pat me on the shoulder and say, "Now you're really grown up." I imagined them discussing with me the best way to renovate, what wallpaper to choose, what kitchen color would complement the light from the window. I thought this evening would be one of those you'd treasure in your heart, proof that it all wasn't in vain. When I opened the door, the house greeted me with the smell of Mom's stew, thick, spicy, with hints of bay leaf and sweet carrots, the smell of childhood, comfort, and safety. "Nicolina." Mom rose from her chair, smiling broadly, and hugged me, leaving a trace of flour on my cheek from her apron. "Just in time for dessert," she said, and I felt the tension ease a little. We ate apple pie, that signature one, with cinnamon and a crispy crust, and I caught myself thinking that just one more bite and I'd tell them everything. I couldn't hold it inside any longer. My heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear the conversations at the table. I put my fork down, smiled, too wide, unnaturally, and said, "Guys, I need to tell you something." The silence fell instantly, even Sandra stopped fiddling with her phone, all eyes turned to me. "I bought an apartment," I said, and for a second it seemed as if time stood still. The air seemed thick, viscous. You could hear a pin drop if someone wanted to drop one. Mom spoke first. She clasped her hands, a familiar, almost theatrical gesture. "Nicolina, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you warn us?" I tried to hold back a smile, feeling my insides tremble, not with fear, but with excitement. "I wanted to surprise you," I explained. "I wanted it to be a big discovery." And without waiting for an answer, I took out my phone. "Here, look." I scrolled through the photos, showing empty rooms, windows streaming daylight, and tried to convey in words the delight I felt standing there, in the midst of my new life. I handed the phone to Sandra, because she was sitting closest. She looked at the screen, squinted, then smiled, briefly, unpleasantly. "Oh my God," she said, handing the phone to Leonardo. "As usual, you believed this nonsense." Her laugh was barbed, not the kind one remembers fondly. "You have absolutely no taste, Nico," she added, looking me straight in the eye. My smile wavered. "What do you mean?" I asked, but my voice was already unsure. Mom picked up the phone, looked at it, and shook her head. "Nicolina, my dear, you should have taken Sandra with you. She has an eye for such things. The apartment is terrible, honestly." Dad, who had been silent until then, peered over Mom's shoulder and chuckled. "Well, yes, it's clearly an old place, a lot of work." Leonardo chuckled and, handing the phone back to me, said with that smug look that always irritated me, "Well, it suits you very well, Nicolina." I felt as if someone had punched me right in the ribs, not hard, but enough to take my breath away. Everything had gone wrong. They should have been happy, they should have been proud. Instead, they laughed. I sat there, staring into my empty glass, feeling the warmth of joy give way to something cold and sticky, as if a crack had opened inside me. I heard them shift their conversation to something else entirely, the weather, the neighbor's new dog, and no one even mentioned my apartment again. For 5 minutes, I sat there without saying a word, afraid that if I opened my mouth, I wouldn't be able to hold back the tears. Then I stood up. "I have to go," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Already?" Mom asked, but her tone was distracted, as if she were asking out of politeness. "Yeah, I'm busy at home," I replied. No one offered to stay. I stepped out into the night, into its thick, almost tangible silence, and drove home, not turning on the radio, not playing music, just listening to my own breathing. When I parked at my new apartment, I sat in the car for a few minutes, looking at the building, at the neighbors' lit windows, where someone was laughing, where the smell of dinner wafted, where, perhaps, I could hear what I so sorely missed. Then I got out, climbed the steps, inserted the key, closed the door behind me, and only then did I allow myself to collapse. I slid down the wall, pressing my back against the cold door, and burst into tears like a child who has lost something irreplaceable. Everything I'd lived for these years, every penny, every rejection, every hope for my own, crumbled to dust in 2 minutes. Leonardo's words echoed in my head over and over again. It suits you very well, Nicolina, and with each repetition, they dug deeper, as if someone was whispering them deliberately to keep me from getting up. I must have cried for an hour, sitting on the cold floor, hugging my knees, feeling the tears drip onto the old parquet, leaving tiny dark stains like the traces of years gone by. Then something clicked inside me, as if someone had turned off an invisible faucet of self-pity, and despair was replaced by anger, real, hot, sincere. What the hell is wrong with them? I whispered, rising to my feet. This was my apartment, bought with money I'd saved for 8 years, denying myself everything from new shoes to vacations. They hadn't contributed a penny, hadn't helped with the search, hadn't even asked how I was coping, and now, you see, they didn't like my choice. This thought made me wipe my face and straighten up. I looked around, at the peeling walls, the dim light bulb hanging overhead, the old floorboards, and suddenly realized I was seeing it all differently for the first time. Yes, the place needed work, but it was solid, reliable, honest, unpretentious, and most importantly, it was mine alone. I swore to myself that I would make it amazing, so that no one would ever dare doubt my taste or my abilities again. And so a new chapter began. Every day after work, I drove here, to the dust, paint, noise, and smell of thinner. Every weekend, I got up early, pulled on my father's old shirt, picked up a brush, hammer, and screwdriver, and got to work. I painted walls, repaired old cabinets, retiled the bathroom, polished floors until my arms began to shake and my back ached with fatigue, but this fatigue was pleasant. Like after a long walk by the sea, it filled me with meaning. Every corner, every shelf, every little detail became part of my work and my will. A month flew by. I didn't call my family, and they didn't call me either. This probably would have hurt if I hadn't been so busy, and, frankly, I felt at peace without their constant advice and subtle jabs. By the end of the month, the apartment had been transformed beyond recognition. I'm not even being modest. It looked magnificent, modern, bright, stylish, with new curtains, the smell of fresh paint, and polished floors that reflected the light of the setting sun like the surface of water. Everything I dreamed of was embodied in these walls. One evening, after finishing the finishing touches, I stood in the middle of the living room with a cup of wine and looked around. And suddenly I thought, you know what, it's time to have a housewarming party. Somewhere inside me, I simmered with the desire to prove my family wrong, that my apartment wasn't terrible, that I had taste, that I'd created beauty no less beautiful than their perfect homes. Yes, I understood that this motivation was a little bitter, not the healthiest, but it was honest. I was still hurt by their words, by that evening when I'd first decided to share my joy and been mocked, but they were still my family, and part of me still hoped that maybe, seeing it with their own eyes, they'd feel proud. I sat down at the kitchen table and typed a message to Mom and Sandra. Hi, I'm having a housewarming party this Saturday at 5 p.m. I hope you can come. I can't wait to show you what I've done with this place. I added the address and hit send. The replies arrived 2 hours later. Mom wrote briefly, "We'll be there," and Sandra replied with almost the same words, "Of course we will." No exclamations, no smiles, not even a hint of interest, no congratulations or "should I bring anything?" Just dry agreement. I reread their messages several times, feeling a slight lump settle somewhere in the pit of my stomach, but I pushed the sadness aside. They would come, and that was enough. Then I decided to call my grandmother. Grandma Rose is my mother-in-law, 78 now, but her voice still rings with that youthful exuberance that makes everyone around her feel warmer. She lives just 20 minutes away, and we've always been especially close. As a child, I spent weekends with her. We baked cinnamon cookies, weeded the flower beds, and in the evenings drank tea from huge cups and talked about life. "Grandma, it's me, Nicolina," I said, and my heart seemed to expand at her joyful, "Oh, dear. I have news. I bought an apartment." A joyful sigh was heard on the other end of the line. "You bought it? Oh, how wonderful. Tell me where, how, everything." I laughed, telling her about the house, about how much work I'd put into it, how I painted it myself, how I chose the colors. We talked for almost half an hour. She inquired about every corner, delighted in my every word, and I felt my soul come alive with each. "I'm proud of you, darling. My housewarming is Saturday at 5, will you come?" I asked, and froze for a second. as if afraid of refusal. "I'd love to, darling. I might just be a little late. I have things to do this afternoon." 7? 7 is perfect, Grandma. We said goodbye, and when I hung up, I caught myself smiling genuinely. For the first time in weeks, that call gave me strength, as if reminding me, I'm not alone, and what I've done truly matters. I spent the rest of the week as if in a light dream, in which everything revolved around one thought: to make the evening perfect. I wanted every detail of my housewarming to speak for me, so that they wouldn't have to listen to excuses or words, so that they could simply walk in, breathe in, look, and understand. I ordered food from an Italian restaurant, the same one we used to go to as a family sometimes, back when everything seemed simpler. Chicken parmesan for Mom, because she always said they made it better than anyone else. Lasagna for Dad, with that same layer of cheese he always peeled off with a fork and ate separately, like a child. For Sandra, I chose her favorite Caesar salad, light and crisp, as she liked to say about herself. I ordered wine, the same one we once drank on Mom's birthday, when she still laughed without a hint of weariness in her eyes. And, of course, dessert, tiramisu, delicate, like a memory of times when we were connected by something more than just family. I even bought flowers, a huge bouquet of white lilies, which I placed in a vase on the dining room table, filling the room with their sweet scent. On Friday evening, I scrubbed the floors until they sparkled, wiped every shelf, arranged candles, and stood by the window for a long time, looking at my new home reflected in the glass, as if it weren't just an apartment, but the embodiment of all my efforts and pain. I wanted them to fall silent, stunned, as they stepped through the door. And for me to finally see in their eyes not pity, not condescension, but pride. Saturday arrived. I woke up before my alarm, and all day my heart beat strangely, too fast, too strongly. By 4:30, everything was ready. Food was warming in the oven, wine was chilling in an ice bucket, the apartment was sparkling clean. I stood in front of the mirror in a new blue blouse and convinced myself that everything would be fine, that today everything would change. 5 o'clock, I checked my phone, nothing. I looked at the door, then back at the clock. 5:15, 5:20, 5:30. I was starting to get nervous. Maybe they had the wrong address? Maybe it was traffic? Or were they just running late? I checked my phone again, no call, no message. 6 o'clock, still silence. I picked up my phone and started calling. First Mom, voicemail, then Dad, same thing, then Sandra, then Leonardo. Each time, a quick click and an automatic connection to the answering machine. No dial tone, no sound, as if their phones were switched off, as if they simply didn't exist. By 6:30, I was overcome with true terror. I paced the apartment, looking at the table with the plates, the candles, the bottle of wine, and I couldn't understand. How could this be? They promised, they said, we'll be there. At precisely 7, my phone vibrated, a message from Mom. Hi, Nicolina, we're currently having dinner with Sandra, Leonardo, and his parents at Chez Lauren. It's much nicer than being in your horrible apartment. I hope you understand. I stared at the screen, disbelieving, reading it over and over again. Chez Lauren, one of the most expensive restaurants in town, a place Sandra had dreamed of for years, where candles are served in crystal and the waiters speak in whispers. The words burned my eyes, as if someone had poured acid into my blood, but before I could process anything, another message arrived, from Sandra. It was a photograph. They were all sitting at a large round table, Mom, Dad, Sandra, Leonardo, and his parents, all dressed up, with well-groomed faces, all laughing, raising glasses of wine, as if celebrating something. The caption underneath the photo was short, family dinner, much better than expected. I didn't immediately understand what was happening, only then did I feel as if someone had punched me in the gut, and then, not letting me catch my breath, set me on fire from the inside. The air grew heavy, the world murky. I put the phone down and simply burst into tears. Not the angry cry you cry over injustice, but a quiet, painful one, where every breath is a pain. The tears flowed slowly, heavily, as if they weren't despair, but the very belief that family is always home. I'm done, I whispered, feeling a surge of strength building inside me for the first time in a long time. I'm done, never again. I'll never wait for their approval. I won't try to make them proud, and I certainly won't let them hurt me again. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and opened the oven. The smell of the chicken parmesan I'd ordered for Mom hit me in the face, warm, cozy, almost mocking. I took the dish out, sat straight at the table, and began to eat. The chicken had cooled, the cheese had thickened, but I didn't care. I ate, and with every spoonful, it was as if I was giving back something they'd taken from me. I ate the portion I'd ordered for Mom, then helped myself to lasagna, then tried a salad, everything they were supposed to eat here, with me. Perhaps half an hour had passed when there was a knock on the door. The sound was so unexpected that I almost dropped my fork, and then I remembered, Grandma Rose was supposed to be here at 7. I quickly wiped my eyes, stood up, and opened the door. There she stood, in her light coat, her hair neatly done, holding a beautifully wrapped gift. Grandma, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Nicolina, my dear. She smiled so broadly that my heart fluttered. Sorry I'm late, the traffic was terrible today. She handed me the gift, carefully, with the care one shows when handing over not an object but a piece of one's soul. This is for you, my dear, for your new home, she said, smiling warmly and in a special way, as if there was much more behind that smile than mere courtesy. I carefully peeled off the paper, trying not to tear it, as if this were a ritual, not simply unwrapping a package, and when I finally opened the box, I gasped. Inside lay a vase, not just beautiful, but truly luxurious, made of heavy crystal, with a soft iridescence along the edges, as if morning dew were floating in the depths of the glass. It was as elegant as Grandma herself, and clearly worth a fortune. Grandma, this is amazing, I whispered, the words caught somewhere between gratitude and tears. Thank you so much. She looked at me with tender attention, but something changed in her gaze as she looked closer. Nicolina, she said softly, but with concern in her voice, have you been crying? Your eyes are red. And then, as if something had burst inside, I told her everything, every detail, every word, every humiliation, as if I was afraid that if I left anything inside, it would poison me forever. I told her how I waited for them, how I checked my phone, how I called again and again, how then I received a message, and then a second, and how they laughed at that luxurious table while I sat alone among the candles and the food prepared for them. When I finished, my grandmother sat motionless, like stone, only her eyes sparkled, and for the first time in my life I saw anger in them, real, pure, like fire. Her hands trembled as she pulled her phone out of her purse. I'll call your father right now, she said, pressing her lips into a thin line. I'll tell him everything I think about this shameful behavior. But suddenly she froze, looked away, then at me, and slowly put the phone back in her purse. No, she said with unexpected calm, actually, I have a better idea. She looked at me with the same gaze I remembered from childhood, slightly narrowed, determined, when she was plotting something, and even the sky seemed to be playing along with her. I know how to make them regret what they did, she said, the corners of her lips twitching slightly. What do you mean, Grandma? I asked, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand, suddenly feeling both scared and curious. She sank down onto my sofa and gently patted the seat next to her. Sit down, dear, I need to tell you something. I sat down next to her, still holding the crystal vase, which at that moment seemed like a symbol of something greater, strength, memory, connection. Nicolina, Grandma began, placing her hand on mine, this vase isn't the only gift I wanted to give you today. I've been watching you for years, dear. I see how you work, how you never give up, how you save, how you do everything yourself, without asking anyone for a penny. She paused for a moment, pulled a thick leather folder from her purse, and handed it to me. But your sister, her voice grew a little harsher, not angry, but rather weary. Everything always came easier for her. Her parents paid for her entire wedding, $30,000. Then they added $15,000 so she and Leonardo could put a down payment on a house. Sandra didn't even notice how it all fell out of the sky. I listened silently, and something inside me was churning, not envy, no, just bitterness at the fact that everything was suddenly clear now. Open the folder, Grandma said. My fingers trembled as I unfastened the clasp and unfolded the documents. At first, I didn't understand anything, the lines, the stamps, the signatures. Then my gaze caught the address at the top of the page, and I was speechless. It was the address of my grandmother's house by the lake, the very same one, with the white curtains and veranda, where I once caught butterflies, where she taught me to drink tea from porcelain cups, and where the mornings smelled of lilacs and fresh bread. Grandma, I breathed, what is this? She smiled a little tiredly, but her eyes sparkled with that same lively gleam I remembered from childhood. This is your home now, Nicolina. I completed all the paperwork last week. The house by the lake is yours now. It's worth about $400,000, it's in perfect condition, on the shore. And I know you'll cherish it. I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, but these tears were different, light, grateful, pure, like the first spring rain. Grandma leaned back on the sofa, folding her hands in her lap. I was going to announce this gift today, in front of the whole family, she said, and then I wanted to give Sandra $250,000 in cash, to balance everything out, yours the house, hers the money, but... She grinned and spread her hands. They didn't come, did they? They preferred a restaurant, wine, and ostentatious luxury. They decided to humiliate you, Nicolina, decided to show that your happiness wasn't important to them. She paused for a moment, and I heard her breathing become firm and confident. So, now everything is different. Sandra won't get anything, not a cent. I stared at her, not believing what I was hearing. Grandma, are you serious? I whispered, and something inside me ignited, a mixture of surprise, love, and indescribable relief. Absolutely serious, she said in that confident voice that left no room for doubt, and that's not all. Grandma reached into her purse again, which always seemed mysteriously tidy, and pulled out an old-fashioned checkbook, the very one I remembered her with from childhood, when she'd write out money for me for ice cream and a movie. She settled herself more comfortably, spread it out on her lap, and, without blinking, wrote out the check, signing it with the grace of a conductor playing the final note of a symphony. Then she turned to me and held it out. I picked it up, looking at the neat figures, and the world seemed to swim slightly before my eyes. The numbers were too big to take in right away. $250,000, a feeling of such unreality washed over me, as if I were standing not in my living room, but somewhere in a dream where life had suddenly decided to be kind. This money will be enough to cover most of your mortgage, Nicolina, Grandma said calmly, as if she were talking not about $250,000 but about some ordinary, everyday trifle. After that, your payments will be so tiny, and you'll finally be able to live, not just survive. I couldn't hold back. The tears began to flow again, helplessly, but now they weren't filled with despair, but with gratitude, release, a strange feeling, as if the world had finally acknowledged my efforts. I buried my face in my hands and kept repeating. Grandma, why are you doing this? Why? She came up to me, placed her hand on my shoulder, and her touch was so strong and tender that I fell silent. Because you deserve it, darling, because you showed me who you really are, because you always stood your ground, even when everyone else turned their backs on you, and because your family behaved disgustingly today, and I will not tolerate my granddaughter being humiliated. She straightened up, smoothed her skirt, carefully, almost ritualistically, and said with a slight smile, in which that steely glint I had seen in her eyes flashed again. And now I want you to take a picture of us together, holding the house deeds. I blinked, confused. Why? I asked, not understanding the point of this. Grandma smiled, but it wasn't the kind, gentle smile she used to greet me with as a child, when I'd run to her with knees scraped on the pavement. No, it was the smile of a shark, intelligent, cold, and impeccably calculating. Because your family needs to understand, actions have consequences. I obediently took the phone, and we took a photo, me, red-eyed but with a dazzling smile, and she, proud and unwavering, holding the documents. The photo turned out unexpectedly beautiful, not staged, but alive. There was something solemn about it, as if a moment of truth had been captured. I posted the photo on Instagram and Facebook, writing a short caption. My wonderful grandmother just gave me the most incredible gift, her lake house. I am so grateful and blessed. The first notifications started coming in almost immediately, hearts, comments, congratulations, from colleagues, college friends, neighbors, even from people I barely remembered. You deserve it. What a beautiful story. This is what true love and family means. My phone vibrated incessantly with new messages. My grandmother, sitting next to me, watched with interest, her eyes narrowing slightly. Excellent, she said with satisfaction. Now we wait. We sat for almost another hour, drinking tea and discussing how I would decorate the house by the lake, where the bedroom would be, where I would hang the curtains, how I would start growing flowers again like I used to. We laughed, reminiscing about old times, and there was so much warmth in these conversations that I almost forgot everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. When she was about to leave, I called her a taxi and walked her to the door. She turned before leaving, stroked my cheek, and said, "Remember, my dear, justice always finds its way, sometimes through silence, sometimes through a loud deed." After she left, the apartment seemed filled with light. I sat on the couch, looking at the documents and the check, two simple pieces of paper, but with such weight that they could change everything. I remembered myself a few hours earlier, sitting on the floor with a cold chicken, broken, humiliated, alone, and now I had a $400,000 house and enough money to almost pay off the mortgage. That night, I went to bed with a feeling I probably hadn't experienced since childhood, a calm, warm happiness when the world finally isn't against you. I woke to the insistent ringing of my phone. It was around 8 in the morning, Sunday, and the calls were coming one after another. I sleepily reached for the nightstand and glanced at the screen. 17 missed calls. Mom, Dad, Sandra, Leonardo. I blinked, and then it dawned on me, a post. I grinned and pressed silent, let them wait. But the calls didn't stop. A few minutes later, the messages started pouring in, one after another, increasingly insistent. Mom wrote, "Nicolina, I don't know what you said to Grandma Rosa, but you have to fix it, immediately." Sandra, "You're so selfish, this house should have gone to someone with a family." Dad, "Your grandmother seems completely out of her mind, we'll come and talk to you in person." And again Sandra, this time furiously, "You probably talked her into it, huh? Taking advantage of the old lady, you should be ashamed." I took screenshots of every message, especially the ones where Sandra was insulting, where they called Grandma out of her mind. The more I read, the calmer I became. By midday, their words had turned into a veritable torrent of fury. They called me a manipulator, insisted I didn't deserve a house or money, and wrote that my grandmother was too old to make decisions. And even when Sandra accused me of taking advantage of an elderly woman's trust, I no longer felt pain or fear, only a strange, majestic calm, the kind that comes when justice finally comes your way. I didn't respond to anything, not a single message, not a single complaint, not a single word of the torrent of accusations that poured at me from their phones. I simply saved every screenshot as proof of their rage and waited, not knowing what exactly, perhaps silence, perhaps peace, perhaps the moment when they finally exhausted themselves, but, of course, they didn't. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, someone began persistently knocking on my door. I stood up, went to the peephole, and saw Mom and Sandra. Their faces were twisted with irritation and tension, their eyes blazing as if they were preparing not for a conversation, but for a fight. They began pounding harder, so hard the door shook in its frame. "Nicolina, we know you're in there," I heard my mother's voice, cold and irritated. "Open the door." I took a deep breath, feeling not fear but a strange calm rise within me, heavy and determined, like stone. "Sorry," I replied without opening the door, "you're late for my housewarming, and besides, isn't my apartment too awful for your taste?" There was a pause, then Sandra's shrill voice cut through the air. "You don't need this house, Nicolina, you don't even have a family." "I do, I'm pregnant, I need this house for my child." I couldn't help but laugh. Laughter burst forth loudly, unexpectedly, from somewhere deep within, where, perhaps, everything I hadn't allowed myself to feel had been pent up for a long time. "Congratulations on your pregnancy, Sandra," I said calmly, "but I still won't give you the house." A second of silence, then my mother's voice, hard and cold, like an icy blade. "Then consider your family gone." I laughed again, quieter this time, almost wearily, but sincerely. "That's your problem, not mine," I replied, and without waiting for them to continue, I went into the bedroom, turned on the TV at full volume, and simply stopped hearing their screams and banging. After about 10 minutes, there was silence. They had given up. Several days passed, the phone no longer rang, only the occasional new message appeared, short and cold, like needle pricks, but I didn't even open them. Then, in the evening, as the day was drawing to a close, the phone rang, the name Grandma Rose. I immediately felt as if the house had brightened. "Nicolina, dear," her voice was soft, but beneath it was a hint of steel. "I'm hosting a small family gathering tomorrow evening. I want you to come, at 6 o'clock, okay?" I'll be there, Grandma, I replied, without asking any further questions. The next evening, I arrived at her place promptly at 6. Her house, ancient and always faintly scented with lavender and vanilla, glowed with a soft light from within. Through the window, I saw familiar silhouettes. Mom, Dad, Sandra, and Leonardo were already there. They were sitting in the living room, awkwardly silent, as if unsure where to put their hands or where to look. When I walked in, Sandra immediately jumped up from her chair. "Grandma," she almost screamed, "she manipulated you. She forced you to give her this house." "Sit down, Sandra," Grandma said firmly, without even raising her voice. It was so confident that Sandra obediently sat back down. "I've called you all here, and I'm the one doing the talking." I sat next to the window, feeling the air in the room tense as if it were a harp. Grandma stood before us, straight and calm, like a judge. "I've gathered you because I have an announcement to make," she began, her gaze heavy and penetrating, as if she could see right through each of them. "Your behavior at Nicolina's housewarming party was disgusting, absolutely disgusting." Dad immediately shifted in his chair, raising his hand as if he wanted to say something. "Wait, Mom, it's all wrong." "No, Tom," Grandma interrupted, "you wait. You and Linda promised your daughter you'd be there to celebrate her achievement. Instead, you went out to dinner at some fancy restaurant and even dared to send her photos to show how much fun you were having without her." Mom tried to protest, her voice trembling. "We didn't think." "Exactly," Grandma said sharply, you didn't think how cruel it looked, how painful it was." Grandma took a step forward, and I saw a glint in her eyes, not anger, but determination. "When I found out about all this, I told Nicolina that I'd originally planned to announce my gift to her, the lake house, at her housewarming party, and then she planned to hand Sandra a check for $250,000, to make it all fair." Sandra turned pale, her eyes widening. "What?" she whispered, "what did you say?" "Exactly what you heard," Grandma replied calmly, "but since you didn't come to support your sister, didn't even bother to congratulate her, you get nothing." Sandra jumped up, her face flushed, and she almost screamed. "This is crazy. I'm having a baby. Is it fair that she gets everything and I get nothing?" Grandma looked at her calmly, without any malice, but with such firmness that Sandra's words vanished into thin air. "Life isn't fair, Sandra," she said quietly, "but it's especially unfair when people treat others badly and expect a reward." Mom and Dad sat, looking at Grandma, as if her words were no louder than a whisper, but more painful than any blow. Their mouths hung open, as if searching for air that had suddenly become too thick to breathe. Mom was the first to break the silence. Her voice was taut as a thin string. "You can't do this, Mom. Sandra's pregnant, she needs help more than Nicolina." Grandma slowly looked up, and her eyes took on that calm that comes from people who have been through too much to fear other people's judgment. "Really?" she asked quietly, but her voice rang with steel. "Tell me, Linda, did Sandra save for 8 years to buy her own place, like Nicolina did? Did she work nights and weekends to create something of her own, albeit small, but honest? Did she sand the walls, paint, and lay tiles herself, to turn a concrete box into a home? Or maybe it was you and Tom who paid for her $30,000 wedding and gave her $15,000 for a down payment on a house, while Nicolina didn't get a cent?" The room was silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock, measuring the seconds, each one a blow to the conscience. No one answered, even Sandra, who usually talked endlessly, now simply stared at the floor, as if trying to disappear. "I thought so," said Grandma, sinking into her favorite high-backed chair. She folded her hands in her lap, looked at everyone in turn, and added more gently, but no less firmly, "And one more thing, I have plenty of property, savings, and stocks left. I could very easily revise my will, excluding certain people who think it's okay to humiliate others, to hurt them, and then demand a reward." You could hear a pin drop. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, their faces white, and Sandra's tears grew louder. "It's not fair," she almost screamed, "it's all unfair." "You know what's really unfair?" I said, raising my head for the first time. My voice was quiet, but every word seemed to cut through the air. "Getting messages from you calling me selfish, manipulative, calling me a bitch, Sandra, and Grandma crazy, just because she showed me kindness." I took out my phone and, opening the folder with screenshots, turned the screen toward them. There, every message, every insult, every word you sent me that night when I cried in an empty apartment. Grandma leaned over, looked at the screen, and I saw something change in her face. Her gaze became cold, unwavering. "So that's how you spoke of me," she said quietly. "You said I was crazy." There was no answer, only Sandra's sniffling and my father's nervous cough. "Well," Grandma said calmly, leaning back in her chair, "I think it will be much easier for me to make the final decision about the will now." No one else tried to speak, they simply sat there, their eyes downcast. Then, almost in unison, they rose, avoiding looking at me and Grandma, and left the living room. The door slammed, and a deep, thick silence fell, like after a thunderstorm. Grandma and I were left alone. Her face gradually softened. We talked for about another hour, about home, about life, about how easy it is to lose loved ones when you forget that love can't be bought. The following week, I went to the bank and deposited that very check. When the clerk announced the new monthly payment, only $300 instead of the previous $1,500, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in a long time, I felt free to breathe. A few days later, I went to the lake house. It stood there, as if from a dream, a light tree, old apple trees, the still surface of the water, reflecting the sky. Everything was even more beautiful than I remembered. The first thing I did was change the locks. I knew my parents and Sandra still had the keys, and I didn't want any surprises. A couple of weeks later, Mom called. Her voice was soft, almost tender. "Nicolina, let's meet up, maybe we can have dinner together? I want everything to be like before, we are family, after all." I smiled, looking out the window at the lake, where the sunset painted the water pink gold. "We were never a family, Mom, you're just afraid Grandma will cut you out of the will." "That's not true," she said quickly, but the lie in her voice was as clear as a false note in a favorite song. "I'm no longer interested in fake family dinners," I said calmly. "You made your choice the day you didn't come to my housewarming party." I hung up and blocked their numbers. Now my life has become quiet and fulfilling. I talk to my grandmother every week. We often have dinner together, laugh, and sometimes we go to the lake house, just sit by the water, drink mint tea, and she tells me stories about her family, what it was like when she was young, what dreams she had, who she loved, who she forgave, and I listen, because these stories are the only real thing I have left. She is my family, the real one, the only one who came when everyone else turned away. Let my parents and Sandra dine in their restaurants, discussing justice and division. I no longer wait for their approval and don't let them hurt me. I have a beautiful apartment, a wonderful house by the lake, and a peace of mind that I built myself, just like I once built my own walls, brick by brick. Sometimes I think, the best family isn't the one you share blood with, but the one that stays when everyone else is gone. For me, that's Grandma Rosa. As for the rest, let them live as they please, their loss is no longer my pain.